Tom, we've talked enough times about David Lametti and the lack of action from the federal government. Well, today we got both David Lametti and Justin Trudeau coming out in the wake of Bill 96. First, take a listen. This is David Lametti talking about whether Fed action will come based on implementation of Bill 96.
There are ways to implement the bill that would safeguard the rights of Quebecers, constitutional rights which would fall under federal jurisdiction, but also other rights that fall under provincial jurisdiction, which might be the subject of a challenge that Quebecers would take on themselves. So we'll watch that implementation very carefully, and as I said, we will keep all options on the table.
And then we heard from Justin Trudeau.
As a Quebecer, as a Prime Minister, I will always be there to protect the French language. It's important to protect French language minorities across the country. It's important to protect French, which is a minority language in North America, in Quebec. It's also important to protect the English-speaking minorities in Quebec. And that's why, as a federal government, we need to be there to protect the fundamental rights of any and all Canadians, regardless of where they live in the country. And that's exactly what we're going to do.
And then, Tom, right after that, this from François Legault.
C'est un manque de respect flagrant de Justin Trudeau envers les Québécois, puisqu'on sait qu'il y a une majorité de Québécois qui sont d'accord avec la loi 21. Et là, donc, Justin Trudeau vient dire, moi, je vais aller me mêler de ça, puis je vais aller contre la volonté d'une majorité de Québécois.
Bon, Tom, qu'est-ce que tu penses?
Well, I think that François Legault is proving the point that you and I were making yesterday, while the three of us were making yesterday with Natasha, which is essentially this is a political game for Legault. Anytime somebody says, well, they'd like to actually have the legality of this confirmed by the courts or not, then he's going to complain that this is an attack against Quebec. This is the game exactly that he's playing. By the way, you sent me something from Christopher Skeet yesterday right after we did our hit together on the radio. And sure enough, Christopher Skeet was trying to point to the fact that both the Parti Québécois and the Liberals were against Bill 96 was conclusive evidence that it was just the right temperature of porridge, because if they're both against it, then the CAQ has the right mix in the middle. Yeah. So the game that's being played right now by Legault is the opposite side of the game that's being played by Trudeau. Because Trudeau would have you believe that he's actually doing something. But what did he say in those clips? He said that he's going to wait for the individuals whose rights have been taken away, some of those young Muslim women who have been recruited in the Maghreb countries to come and work here as teachers, they've already moved on to Ontario and to Manitoba. Mm-hmm. And these community groups fighting on their behalf are going to keep fighting for years before the courts, before it can even get to the Supreme Court and get a decision. There's one person in this country, there's one individual in Canada who can move this forward for a determination by the Supreme Court, and that person's name is Justin Trudeau, because the Prime Minister of the country can go to Cabinet, get a reference case, have the case referred to the Supreme Court, as they did on secession after the 95 referendum. You say, here are the questions we have to have answered, and the Supreme Court will have to hear that case rapidly as a priority and provide answers. But he won't do that with Bill 21. So he thinks he's being clever by saying, well, we'll wait and wait and wait. But at the same time, he's not doing anything proactive. Bill 21 is an affront. It is an open discrimination against religious minorities. There's no way around that. In general, against religious minorities, whether you're a Sikh trying to become a police officer or a practicing Jew who wears a kippah, you can't become a crown prosecutor. Or, if you're a Muslim teacher and you happen to wear a scarf, in your hair, called a hijab, if you're just wearing that, then you can't even get a job working in the province of Quebec. So this is the scandal that we're trying to deal with. And Mr. Trudeau's words really, frankly, fall flat. With regard to Lametti, Aaron, I hope you remember at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon when you have him on, he's got a legal opinion that says that François Legault can unilaterally change the BNA Act and remove the equality of English and French before the courts in Quebec, because we don't have to wait for his famous word that he repeated 5 times of implementation. You know when a word is drafted for you by your communication staff because you keep repeating it. We'll wait for implementation. No, you don't have to wait for implementation to know that Bill 96 removes the equality of English and French before the courts in Quebec. If you're from British Columbia and you've got a birth certificate, it is no longer considered authentic in Quebec. You'd have to provide a translation, and wait till you find out how much fun it is to try to get an authentic translation instead of just saying the courts are bilingual in Quebec, as they must be under Section 133 of the British North America Act of 1867, the one that Lametti thinks Legault can change unilaterally. So it's just words at this stage, trying to get them through the day. I don't know why Trudeau even bothered to say that, but I will be tuning in at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon to listen to Mr. Lametti talk with you on CJAD 800.
Yeah, perhaps you'd like to be on the phone, Tom, while we do this, so you could ask him that sort of same question directly.
I wouldn't want to spring it on him, but if he would accept to sit down with me and have an interview and ask him those types of questions, boy, would I ever be happy. But you know what? I don't think he's going to accept.
Okay. Let me ask you one thing. In the wake of all this, we have a decision, or we have this move now by Simon Jolin Barrette to follow through on what he claimed he would do. Remember this idea of bilingual judges? He's now taken a Superior Court decision here that said he didn't have jurisdiction and basically said, I don't even need to appeal this. I do have the right to do this. What did you make of that today?
Well, that's why David Lametti should stop beating around the bush and start dealing with the real issues before us, because this is a question of the stability of our court system in Quebec. Because, of course, the executive branch of government, because he's a member of the cabinet, that's called the executive. Simon Jolin Barrette doesn't have the right to dictate to the Chief Justice of Quebec. Even though they went through the legislature, it still doesn't take away the independence of the judicial branch of government. And they're the ones to make the determination as to how many judges, and how you have to share them around the province to make sure that people's right to get their trial in English, for example, is respected. You guys remember a few months back, a really, really bad person accused of some incredibly serious crimes was let go scot-free because they had not respected his right to an English trial. So there's going to be a lot of that, and there's going to be stuff that has to be done all over again. Look, Jolin Barrette even believes that he can order that judges are required by him to translate anything that they write in English into French, and if they don't, it's invalid. He doesn't have that power, and David Lametti knows that he doesn't have that power. So there's no question of waiting for the implementation. This should have been challenged. In the past, any Attorney General of Canada, Conservative or Liberal, would have immediately had the wherewithal to understand that, use the authority of their office, take this case to court, and get a decision so that the respect of the Constitution is guaranteed. That's your number one job as Attorney General of Canada. Uphold the Constitution and have people's rights respected. Lametti is doing neither of the two. So I think that his hollow words don't go anywhere, but I'm still going to tune in tomorrow at 2 o'clock and listen to him, because it's when you listen to their excuses, the way I listened to Pete on the weekend, as he tried to get away from Evan Solomon, who was bearing down on him with some very tough questions. Well, this is exactly what happens with a guy like Lametti, too, because it's easy for him to just stay in his ivory tower and pretend that he's going to look down and say, I'm going to wait for implementation. He knows what's in 96. He should have had the courage to simply do the right thing and take this thing to court right away.
So then my question is, I'm really struggling to comprehend why Lametti and Trudeau don't take a stronger stance on Bill 96 or 21. What have they got to lose?
Well, I think that when you hear the reaction of Legault, you are proven completely right, because Trudeau's getting it the worst of both worlds. He's paying the full political price because he's getting beaten up by Legault with the main French-speaking audience here in Quebec, and at the same time, he's not getting any advantage because he's not doing anything. So everybody in the English-speaking community gets to look at him and says, "Hey, come on, man, those are hollow words. You're just play acting. What do you mean you're going to be there? You'll always be there? Really? You're always going to be there for the minorities. Why didn't you do anything on Bill 21? Why aren't you actually doing anything on Bill 96? Oh, you're going to wait till it gets to the Supreme Court before you do anything on Bill 21 when you could refer it tomorrow morning straight to the Supreme Court. Try that on somebody else. It's not working."
I want to ask one last question, Tom, while we still have a minute here. I heard you this morning. I know we've talked about this before, and I tend to believe this too, this idea that Francois Legault is basically moving towards sovereignty without having to go through the regular steps that previous governments like PQ have had to take. So
right.
This pushback against Justin Trudeau, it's kind of like the sword of Damocles hanging over Trudeau's head here, right? He keeps pushing Legault. Do you actually think Legault would go from push to shove and say, look, as you suggested, the federal government is sticking its nose in our business. The only way to get this done is to, in fact, have a referendum. Is that going to happen?
Don't take my word for it. Go back to the Actualité magazine interview prior to the 2018 campaign. Read what Legault said. He said, "We've tried twice to settle everything in one glorious evening," he said. So it hasn't worked. So we're going to go after more powers in language, immigration, and culture. And if that doesn't, we'll try a step-by-step approach. Step-by-step approach to what, if not sovereignty? And if that doesn't work, what's their next step? That's the real question. I don't think that Legault's given up on sovereignty one bit. I've never believed it.
Okay, before we let you go, Tom, I have to ask, how do you hold a conservative leadership in debate tonight when only one person really speaks French?
Well, good for you for saying that.
Doesn't Poilievre speak French?
Kind of
Well,
passable.
it's going to be very interesting. I'm going to make two predictions, because if you're looking at the GTA, Patrick Brown speaks better French than most people, but he's really, really not fluent in French. Poilievre speaks French like somebody who went to Buffalo to play hockey for 20 years. Like he can get by, but he doesn't know the word for anything. So the minute the discussion gets technical, what's going to happen tonight is a lot of commentators are going to twig to the fact, because I know his French. I've heard him speak it for years. It's actually gotten better than it was when he arrived, because now I believe his wife is from the Montreal area, and he speaks more French today than he ever did. But it's still very rocky when it comes to vocabulary and trying to explain things. So we'll see whether any of that slips up tonight. But what I really want to keep an eye on, and I'll suggest people listen for, is Patrick Brown, because Patrick Brown has a very courageous position against Bill 21. He's the only one who's been clear that he's opposed to Bill 21. Poilievre was in favor of Bill 21. That's when Pierre Paulus became one of his only supporters in the Quebec caucus. And then in the first real debate, he said, no, I've always been against Bill 21. So we'll find out which Pierre Poilievre shows up tonight. But I think that there's another opportunity for Patrick Brown on Bill 96, interestingly enough, because I think that Charest is going to hem and haw and skate all around it. I think that Poilievre is going to do exactly like he did with Bill 21, say one thing in one debate, say the opposite in another, and know that his base doesn't really care. But I think that Patrick Brown scored a lot with a lot of cultural communities across the country when he said that Bill 21 was offensive. It goes against minority rights that are guaranteed by the Charter. And I think he might do the same thing tonight on Bill 96. I'm waiting to see. Because, first of all, he doesn't have a lot of support in Quebec. He knows that there are as many English-speaking Quebecers as there are people in Saskatchewan or Manitoba, practically. And he's probably going to say, well, you know what, there's a whole bunch of ridings where that position of principle might get me a bunch of votes in the leadership race, and he might take that stand. I'm going to be listening for that. I think that Brown might surprise a little bit.
What time is game time tonight, by the way?
I keep forgetting, because I know it's on the channel where I work.
I looked it up yesterday. I think it's 8 to 10.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's what I heard as well. Yeah.
On Radio Canada.
All right. Tonight's drinking game, every time you hear Pierre Poilievre say the word libre, you should have a shot. Tom?
Liberté.
Liberté, right. My bad. Thank you, Tom.